Well, welcome to the welcome to the C Files, folks. I have a throat tea because my throat is giving me fits. So I'm going to finish up this book, The Battle for Christmas. This will be the last reading, or I won't finish the book. Here we go. The last reading, The Battle for Christmas. John Canoe and the Reen Boys. John Canoe, too, eventually disappeared from the American mainland. It was still going strong in North Carolina as late as the 1880s. But by the turn of the 20th century, the old ritual had pretty much disappeared. Its ultimate suppression closely mirrors what we have just seen, according to interviews with elderly Black residents of Wilmington, North Carolina, taken by a folklorist around 1940. The decline of the ritual was a result of new pressures, both from whites and from within the Black community. What seems to have played the decisive role in suppressing the John Canoe bands was the emergence of a new political culture among the white people of Wilmington, a reformist culture that was unwilling to tolerate public drunkenness and the rowdy behavior that accompanied it. One Black resident later recalled, the policemen used to run the Cooners because they would get drunk and kick up a lot of fuss. Another analysis was more elaborate. Cooner was raging here about 1882, but hit done died out about 1900. The reason hit died out was that different city mayors came in to hold office, and they stopped all that. Each Christmas, hit got less and less, and finally the city offices stopped them from marching down the main street. How it's originally written. A key event may have been a serious riot that occurred during the 1898 John Coon Parade, or John Canoe Parade. Good night. Let's get that right. All right. Um, just a moment. It's going to be hot. This tea's going to be hot. But I need it. My throat's messing me up. My concentration. All right, here we go. Hmm. A key event may have been a serious riot that occurred during the 1898 John Canoe Parade. In any event, one woman reported simply that the whites finally run all the Cooners away. Cooner meaning canoe, John Canoe. That's what they mean by that. Canoers would be another way of saying it. But but the folklorists who conducted these interviews also reported that John Canoe began to be opposed by Black ministers who felt that the custom tended to degrade the derogatory N word in the eyes of white people of the community, together with members of the emergent Black middle class, who began to look upon the exhibition as one that lowered their status in the eyes of the whites. They disliked to see their folks making a fool of themselves. And apparently, some of the John Cooners themselves began to feel the same way. One old reconstructed Wilmington Black man reported that the Cooner folk got dikty, which means snobbish or high class. Then they gave up ruffians' ways They got educated. Booker T. Washington might have phrased it differently, but he would have been delighted with the result. All in all, then, the John Canoe ceremony fell victim to a combination of external suppression and internal reform. In its essentials, that was just what a familiar became unfamiliar forms of Christmas revelry within white communities throughout Western culture. And it provides a model for exploring the transformation of Christmas in the white working class culture of the 19th century as well. Consider the Irish. In the 1840s, Ireland constituted the major source of immigration to America, and that land was a major source of new membership in the American industrial working class. In those very years, as it happens, there was a major battle within the Irish community over the use of alcohol, even when it was used as part of the Christmas festivities. Irish Christmas rituals in the early 19th century will be familiar to readers of this book as they are reminiscent of both the English practices described in chapter 1 and the slave practices described in chapter 7. Even when the Irish rituals were religious, they retained the rowdy old carnival note: alcohol, sex, and aggressive begging. Take the midnight mass on Christmas Eve, for example. This event, it was held outdoors, illuminated by great bonfires, was usually preceded and followed by what a 19th century Irish writer termed jovial orgies, preambulating groups who engaged in heavy drinking that often led to illicit sexual couplings. By the 1830s, the church itself had largely abolished the midnight mass. Other Irish Christmas rituals lacked even the veneer of religion. In one urban version of the English wassail, during the weeks before Christmas, several hours before daybreak each night, a group of serenaders would stop at the houses of all the prosperous residents, calling out the hour of the morning and declaring the state of the weather. This ritual was known as calling the Watts, calling the Watts. The tea's helping. The serenaders waited until Christmas Day to go around to every door collecting the expected remuneration. In one instance, in Kilkenny, the lead performer was accompanied each year by a dozen youths in blackface. A retinue of young N-word, derogatory term, as they were termed in the original account, who stopped at the house of every respectable family in the city. There they would drink a holiday toast and be given a half-crown in return. According to this account, the members of the group often became so drunk that they had to be carried back to their own houses. The best known wassail ritual in rural Ireland involved groups of youths known as the Reen Boys, dressed up in rags, ribbons, and bits of colored paper, reminiscent of the John Canoers. The Reen Boys would march noisily through their village, stopping, of course, to sing in front of rich people's houses. One of their songs is virtually identical to the Gloucestershire Wessel quoted in chapter 1. After asking for beer, this group of Reen boys proceeded to pronounce the familiar mix of promise and threat. And if you draw it of the best, I hope in heaven your soul will rest. But if you draw it of the small, it won't agree with the Wren boys at all. But here, too, there was a change initiated and spread from within. Beginning in the late 1830s, Ireland was swept by its own indulgence temperance movement, led by a Roman Catholic priest who was locally born and bred. Father Theobald Matthew, 1790 to 1856. Father Matthew demanded total abstinence or teetotalism, and he called on people to sign a written pledge that they would give up all forms of alcohol in any amount. His movement swept through the Irish countryside like the religious revival it actually was, resonating deeply in both rural and urban areas. By 1842, an astounding 5 million people had signed the Temperance Pledge. Much like Booker T. Washington's more systematic program of personal reform in Tuskegee, the Irish temperance movement took hold because it held out the promise of restoring dignity and self-respect to a conquered and oppressed people. In fact, Father Matthew's movement was deeply intertwined with the political movement for Irish independence from England. And Father Matthew himself promised his potential followers that sobriety would be a means of achieving social advancement for themselves and their children. Needless to say, Father Matthew's temperance crusade had an effect on the old Christmas rituals. For this, there exists a wonderful account in the form of a diary kept by a wealthy English gentlewoman, Elizabeth Smith, who, together with her husband, managed a large estate in the Irish countryside in the years around 1840. The husband seems to have played the part of country squire to his dependents. She called them his pensioners, offering them gifts and forgiving their debts at Christmas time. Elizabeth Smith did not object to the begging, and her diary shows that she was quite happy to play her role, her own part in the ritual. What troubled her was that many of these dependents had chosen to give up drinking. On Christmas morning, 1840, she made a mistake that haunted her throughout the day. I forgot teetotalism when I mixed the puddings, she wrote, and not one of the outside men would taste them. Mrs. Smith expressed grudging and condescending pleasure with the Reformation, that these unruly people have such self-command where they think it a sin to yield to temptation. Well, okay, yeah, it is. But here we go. But she was also disappointed that the old ways were changing. What a pity, she mused, referring to her oversight, or was it to her tenants' new-found sobriety? In any case, early the following morning, the Smiths were awakened by a group of Reen boys shouting, "A regular reveille, the Reen under our windows." The Reen boys, too, were keeping sober, and once again Mrs. Smith took a note of the dampening effects. This morning there were no young women of the party, as there used to be. Maybe they don't find it merry enough now that the whiskey ain't in fashion. It's a fascinating reversal. Here in rural Ireland, we can witness a mid-19th century instance of exactly what Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington claimed was true of the American South. A representative of the ruling classes who wished to see the Christmas drinking continue, and their dependents who decided to stop it themselves. From the mid 1840s on, just after Father Matthew's movement reached its peak, Irish people began to immigrate in massive numbers to the United States. Many of these immigrants have been affected by the movement, and others joined it after they arrived in America. Father Matthew himself spent 2.5 years, from 1849 to 1851, touring the United States, spreading the total abstinence pledge chiefly among his newly arrived countrymen. This was the very time the American temperance movement was hitting a crest of its own, one that would inspire a wave of prohibitionist legislation in several American states. All 6 New England states, for example, passed temperance laws between 1851 and 1855. Eventually, Irish American newspapers that supported the cause of independence from England also began to print Clement Clarke Moore's Visit from St. Nicholas on Christmas Day, a legal holiday. See how much further I got to go. We'll get there. It's just running late, but I'm going to stick with it. This puts, excuse me, it's a wonderful history. I enjoy reading this history. I didn't know that many things were connected to Christmas as far as history goes. Pretty fascinating. This puts in place the final large element in the process by which a carnival Christmas was replaced by a domestic one. Victory in the battle for Christmas in America resulted from a convergence of interests that melded a variety of groups and classes. In the first place, as we have seen, the domestic reform of Christmas was an enterprise of patricians, fearful of their authority. They're fearful for their authority. In New York, the reform was part of a larger project that was a response to the democratization and commercialization of the city, a strategic shift from the use of politics to that of culture as a way of retaining control of urban life. That domestic reform, examined in chapters 2 and 3, led to and was part of the development of a commercial Christmas trade, examined in chapter 4. As such a trade developed, merchants needed the streets to be free of drunks and rowdies in order to secure them for Christmas shoppers. And shoppers themselves needed to feel secure in the streets. But finally, especially in the 1840s, and afterward, the development that I have just traced occurred, a reform from within the working classes themselves, with at least some working class support for a domestic Christmas, added to the existing and growing enthusiasm of the middle classes and the remnants of the old elite. Something new began to happen. Christmas Day became officially recognized as a legal holiday in the United States. It was the individual states, one by one, that passed the necessary legislation. The movement swept the nation during the 2 decades that began in the mid 1840s. By 1865, 27 out of 36 states, along with 4 territories, had set December 25 apart as a day when certain kinds of ordinary business could not legally be transacted. There was an intriguing pattern to this legalization process, a pattern that can be detected by focusing on those states that were relatively late in granting legal recognition to the Christmas Day. Of the 24 states that joined the United States no later than 1820, the first generation of states, as we might think of them, by 1865, all but five have had December 25 a legal holiday. By read it again. Of the 24 states that joined the United States no later than 1820, the first generation of states, as we might think of them, by 1865, all but five had made December 25 a legal holiday. What is striking about the list is that four of the five states that had not done so were slave states: the two Carolinas, Mississippi, and Missouri. Two other slave states, Texas and Florida, both admitted to the Union in 1845, waited until 1879 and 1881, respectively, to legalize Christmas. The slave South seems to have been the laggard in this matter, not New England. Surely all six states in that supposedly Puritan region of the country had recognized Christmas between 1845 and 1861. Connecticut being the first to do so, and New Hampshire the last. To be sure, the pattern was not universal. The first three states to legalize Christmas all permitted slavery, while the final member of the first generation to do so, Indiana in 1875, was a free state. And the Civil War itself may have had something to do with the South's relative recalcitrance, though the war did not stop northern states from proceeding on this score. In any case, the meaning of the pattern is not fully evident, but there is one possible explanation. It has to do with how much pressure there was in any given state for a formal, legislatively mandated release from work at Christmas. Such pressure was strongest in New England. Excuse me. The most heavily industrialized part of the United States, but less so in the slave South. So, an agricultural region that was still governed, as we have seen, by a seasonal rhythm that may have made it unnecessary to dictate a holiday by force of law. This hypothesis is partly borne out by looking at the Christmas legislation in a single highly industrialized state, Massachusetts. Christmas achieved legal recognition in Massachusetts in a pair of laws, passed in 1855 and 1856, respectively, during two turbulent seasons or sessions of an insurgent third party, the American Party, better known as the Know Nothings. Okay? The Know Nothings are best remembered today for a single plank in their platform: a nativitist hostility to the immigrants who were flocking to New England. But just as important, the Know Nothings were a party that represented native born urban workers who actually held almost 25% of the total seats in 1855. The legislation passed by the Massachusetts Know Nothing legislatures included measures to suppress gambling, prostitution, and especially the use of alcohol. The penalty for selling a single glass of liquor was 6 months imprisonment. It also included a set of anti-slavery laws as well as laws related to industrial welfare and safety in the workplace. The Know Nothings almost succeeded in passing a bill that would have ensured factory workers a maximum of 10-hour day. A recent study of the Massachusetts Know Nothing legislature concludes that most of its legislation specifically address the needs of an industrial society. The pro-labor sympathies of the 1855-56 Massachusetts legislature are suggested by the terms of the pair of laws that recognize Christmas Day. The 1855 law simply barred the collection of commercial paper on Christmas, as well as on July 4th, with the intention of putting a stop to large-scale commercial transactions. The 1856 law went further. It established Christmas on July 4, along with Washington's birthday, previously unrecognized, as holidays for state workers, closing down all public offices on those days. The expectation was that closing state offices would have a domino effect, leading to the closing of other businesses as well. The import of this gesture is underlined by a further provision of law, one that established a Monday holiday when any of the 3 dates fell on the Sabbath weekend. Such a provision ensured that state workers would always receive a separate day off on these 3 annual occasions. In other words, Washington's birthday was not afforded legal recognition simply for patriotic reasons, nor was Christmas afforded that recognition simply out of religious considerations. African American Christmas music is still largely associated with such carnival behavior, at least in the blues, the quintessential African American genre, which, by the way, I like the blues. I love the sound of the blues. I have found scarcely a single example of a conventional children's Christmas in blues music, but there are at least a score of Christmas blues about romance. I began to whoopee when it is almost Christmas time. One such blues begins. If I don't get it by Christmas, another one ends. I'll have a New Year's blues. There's a new genre of blues out. I don't know if you know this, but there's a Christian blues that has come out recently, and it's really good. Pretty interesting. All right, has Christian lyrics to it. And a third simply imagines that the day after Christmas is really St. Valentine's Day. Remember that Christmas in the slave South was a time of carnival for most slaves. Several Christmas blues simply associate the holiday with reunion with a woman, as in a very famous song, Hellbound on My Trail, recorded in 1937 by the legendary musician Robert Johnson, about a man on the run. The second verse of this driven piece offers the singer a moment of respite, a respite that he associates with Christmas, and a reunion with his absent lady friend. That verse begins as the singer expresses the fleeting fantasy that if it were only Christmas, oh, would we have a time, baby? It's romance he's thinking of here, not opening presents. Right again. It's romance he's thinking of here, not opening presents. This might be a vestige of slave culture. When Christmas provided a time of reunion for couples who lived on different plantations. In fact, in one blues song, Christmas stands first for leisure time itself, as the singer rejoices that he doesn't have any work to do, so that every day is Christmas, which means he will be free to join his girlfriend and spend all his time making love to her. In another song, the singer laments that he is all alone at Christmas and compares himself to a rooster looking for a setting hen. It is characteristic of the blues to be filled with such wordplay, especially with vivid double entenders. One Christmas blues consists entirely of an extended pun in which the singer searches for his Christmas present in his girlfriend's dresser drawer. Or the wordplay might involve sly mockery of other elements of the middle class domestic Christmas, especially Santa Claus himself. The singer may simply inform his lady friend that Santa Claus will be to see you this very Christmas night. Or he may be a backdoor Santa, a surreptitious Lothario who makes his rounds about the break of day. Or he may assure his woman that he is not too old to perform his expected role. I'm going to be your Santa Claus, even if my whiskers is white. Other Christmas blues are based on a rich metaphoric brew involving stockings or Christmas trees. In one of these, the singer, without bothering to explain himself, urges his woman to take her stocking and hang it up on the head of the bed. In several other blues renditions, the singer proceeds to reverse the stocking's sex when he asks his girlfriend to let me hang my stocking right on your Christmas tree. My goodness. Christmas is so innocent these days compared to that. Or is it? Is there some of that that still goes on? The possibilities of variation in the wordplay based on these stock phrases seem to be almost as limitless as those contained within the strict formal confines of blues music itself. In addition, all of these Christmas blues are in part directed at the conventional domestic Christmas ritual, a ritual they manage to transform into a kind of joyous sacrilege. The backdoor Santa, for example, gives presents to any children he encounters on his rounds, but only to keep them quiet while he is otherwise engaged with their mother. Ho, 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 ho. Wow. Yeah, I'd say some of that still happens. The depravity of humankind, huh? Such gestures are a form of cultural theater, and the mocking commentary they offer is exactly what Mikhail Bakhtin, writing of the 16th century European world of rebellious, has placed at the heart of carnival sensibility. And now we come, well, not yet. I thought we were toward the end. The blues tradition, of course, represents only one aspect of African American Christmas. At the other end of the spectrum is the African American holiday known as Kwanzaa, based loosely on an African harvest celebration. This Christmas season ritual has been gaining in popularity in recent years, especially among middle class American blacks who wish to reclaim their African heritage. Domestic in its nature, Kwanzaa is a good instance of an invented tradition, one that serves as an alternative to the mainstream Christmas holiday, but which also mirrors it in its essentially domestic features. Just like in the Mexican culture, Cinco de Mayo is only celebrated in the United States. It's not actually celebrated in Mexico. How many of you knew that? a made-up tradition in the United States that's about Mexico winning a battle, but Mexico doesn't celebrate it. Isn't that interesting? Kwanzaa is like that. A made-up American holiday. We go back up here. Based loosely on an African harvest celebration, this Christmas season ritual has been gaining in popularity in recent years, especially among middle-class American blacks who wish to reclaim their African heritage. Domestic in its nature, Kwanzaa is a good instance of an invented tradition, one that serves as an alternative to the mainstream Christmas holiday, but which also mirrors it in its essential domestic features. In this, Kwanzaa is similar to the old colonial holiday of Thanksgiving, which the Puritans introduced as a more acceptable alternative to Christmas. Thanksgiving was intended to offer New Englanders an opportunity for seasonal feasting after the conclusion of the harvest, an occasion that was not tainted by the pagan origin of Christmas or by its carnival associations. In the late 18th century, when Christmas had begun to re enter the New England calendar, regional governors sometimes responded by ordering that Thanksgiving be held as close to Christmas as possible, in one year as late as December the 20th. And in this respect, both Thanksgiving and Kwanzaa are similar to the Jewish American holiday of Chanukah. As innumerable commentators have pointed out, until recent times, Chanukah was a distinctly minor holiday in the Jewish calendar, even in its earlier history. Though it seems to have shifted its meaning to fit new circumstances. To begin with, it was simply a celebration of a military victory in the 2nd century BC, the improbable victory of the Maccabees over their Syrian Greek occupiers, together with the rededication of the profane temple that followed. But nowhere in the original accounts was there any reference to the oil that miraculously continued to burn for 8 days, the period of time required for such ritual rededication. Only around the beginning of the Christmas era, at a time when many Jews were becoming assimilated into Hellenic culture, did Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, we could say, become a miracle of lights. Such a major reinterpretation achieved two ends. It played down the element of Jewish military might at a time when assimilated Hebrews would not have wished to appear warlike, and it imitated the Greek solstice celebration, which similarly entailed the burning of lamps, and would itself later be metamorphosed into the ritual of Yule logs and Christmas lights. There is only one element in the observance of Hanukkah, or Hanukkah. It should be Hanukkah. It's spelled CH, but Hanukkah, that mirrors any aspect of the carnival tradition. The element of gambling. Gambling was forbidden in medieval Jewish culture. But an exception was made during the 8 days of Hanukkah. The custom survives today in the form of the little spinning top used by children and known as a dreidel. Dreidels can come to rest on any of four sides, each of which bears a special mark, rather like dice. The connection with dice is a real one. Dreidels were designed as gambling instruments. But it is not Hanukkah that we must look to for the closest Jewish version of the old Christmas. For that, we must turn to another Jewish holiday, the early spring festival known as Purim. This holiday marks the liberation of the Jewish people from still another ancient oppressor, like the carnival Christmas. It is celebrated with the same radical inversion of social hierarchy and the same sanctioned transgression of behavioral boundaries. This point has a large measure, this point in a large measure, let me do it again. This point has, in a large measure, been conveniently forgotten by assimilated Jews, but it is well remembered by the most traditional portion of the modern Jewish community. Back in 1687, though, the Reverend Increase Mather Boston, remember him earlier in the book? Yep. Was able to note that the days of Purim were not intended as a religious festival, but as what he termed a political holiday. And Mather went on to observe that Jews did not look upon these days as holy. They spent them in feasting and in telling merry stories. We are almost done. Merry indeed. Mather was correct. But he could easily have gone further than that. Purim is a latter day Jewish feast of foods. Even today, in a modern parallel to the boy bishop ritual of medieval Europe, yeshiva students take on the role of rabbis. The reversal role seems to be in so many cultures in so many different ways, isn't it? Sacred biblical texts are mocked, recited in nonsensical juxtaposition. Children are expected to interrupt the retelling of the Purim story with jeers and noisemakers. Outdoors, the holiday is a time of parade and masquerade and of almsgiving, too. The streets of Jerusalem and Brooklyn are thick with street theater on these occasions. There is even a rabbinic injunction to get completely drunk at Purim. Literally, to drink so much that one can no longer tell the difference between the two central characters of the Purim legend, the hero, the Mordecai, and the arch villain, Haman, a Persian who had unsuccessfully ordered the annihilation of the Jews. Metaphorically speaking, that means to get so drunk that one cannot distinguish good from evil. It is hard to imagine a more profoundly carnival-like gesture. Now for inventing real tradition. And this is the end, this will be the end of the book, the last section. I promise. Thank you for sticking with me. If you stuck all the way through this book, God bless you and thank you. And I hope it's been a blessing. Here then, and in some improbable places, are remnants of a carnival holiday tradition. But a word of caution is in order. We should pause before thinking of these as remnants of the real holiday tradition. We should not assume that Kwanzaa is less authentic than the blues, or that Hanukkah is less authentic than Purim, or that Thanksgiving is less authentic than New Year's Eve. One set of all these celebrations may be respectable, and in the United States at least, relatively recent, while the other may be rowdy and relatively older, but neither has a monopoly on authenticity. To be sure, this book has argued that the respectable set of holidays, and particularly the familiar Christmas, represent something of an invented tradition. This is no longer such a novel idea. One recent collection of essays, published in England under the title Unwrapping Christmas, actually opens with a blunt claim. A consensus appears to be emerging around the interpretation of the contemporary Anglo-American Christmas, which would place this festival firmly within the more general category of phenomenon termed the invention of tradition. But while the invention of tradition offers a very useful historical tool, like all tools, it is subject to abuse. The easiest and most tempting way to abuse the idea of invented traditions may be to believe that if a tradition is invented, it is somehow tainted, not really authentic. There are several reasons why such a belief is false, but the most important of them is that it is based on a profoundly questionable assumption that before there were invented traditions, there were real ones that were not invented. It is difficult, though, to imagine such a thing as a tradition that is not invented or reinvented and invented yet again. That is surely as true of the carnival Christmas as it is of Christmas as domestic idyllity. As I noted in chapter 1, the carnival Christmas varied widely from place to place and from time to time. And fruitless, it is fruitless to divine some primal unchanging tradition, even in a small region of, say, England or Ireland. The wassail songs surely change from one year to the next, depending in depending in any given year on variables as unstoppable unstable as the quality of the harvest or the ephemeral mood of the relationship between patrons and their clients. Excuse me. To return to a point made in chapter 1, it is useful to think of traditions not as static entities, but as the dynamic forces that are constantly being negotiated and renegotiated. Inversion rituals, for example, express the fault lines of the society of early modern Europe. The great inequalities of wealth and power that both separate the classes and bound them together. The very appeal that peasants and tenants sometimes made to customary rights, to old traditions, in other words, was on occasion used as a political gesture to help preserve certain Christmas benefits. The best beer, for example, or an extra day of leisure. They could always come under challenge. In a year of poor harvest, or with the less forthcoming son of generous landlord, the appeal to age-old custom, then as later, was more political strategy than simple statement of fact. We are entitled to it now because we have always had it. It might well mean little more than you let us do it last year and we want it again now. It is in just this way that traditions have always been fashioned. Yet this is difficult to accept. Today we may yearn for a past that has no past. We require some traditions to be unchanging, to exist outside of time. And if these cannot be our own traditions, then at least let them be the older ones that they displace. If Santa Claus and Christmas trees turn out to be creations of the past 2 centuries, at least Carnival itself must be rooted in deep cultural soil, as transcendent as the seasonal cycle itself. But we must try to recognize such temptations for what they are. Our own culture has made us acutely aware of inauthenticities that pervade our own lives in advertising, business, and politics. And that awareness presses us to seek out the practices of other different societies, including those of our own past, distant places, and times that carried the promise of being more in touch than our own with what really matters. Invariably, these alien societies carry an implicit promise. They have maintained untainted by the forces of commodity culture. They have remained untainted by the forces of commodity culture. Thus, we are easily fascinated by primitive peoples whom we can make out to have had minimal contact with Western society. We tour the third world or untouched pockets of our own society, and we do not choose to suspect that the natives already know all about us and just what we expect them to be like, or to recognize that it is our own culture that is selling them to us as just another commodity. We read about times gone by, and we do not wish to think those were just as complex and as morally ambiguous as our own times. But of course, they were. Someone expressed this idea with great elegance by pointing out that nobody has ever lived in the past. One way to help clarify that point is to look for living expressions of carnival here in the present, not in hidden corners of our society, but right where we encounter it in our ordinary lives. Are we really prepared to romanticize carnival behavior when it disturbs our own sense of civility and our personal privacy? I'll read it again. Are we really prepared to romanticize carnival behavior when it disturbs our own sense of civility and our personal privacy? It is one thing to lament the suppression of Wassel, the Reen Boys, or John Canoe, but it might be quite another to feel comfortable with the aggressive begging that has returned to our cities and towns, or with the deliberately offensive speech and manners of middle class young people who are busy probing and transgressing the limits of acceptable behavior. The blues may be an expression of modern carnival, but so is the sound of young men, whether black or white, driving slowly down city streets with boom boxes blaring from open car windows. And for those of us who happen to reside in academic communities, so is the sound of post-examination festivities at the nearby fraternity house. It is intriguing to force ourselves to think of such animal house celebrations as modern carnival, or even as a latter day form of street theater. Youthful mockery, directed in part at the workday adult world whose privileges and burdens present day young people are, let me try it again. Excuse me. I apologize for my throat, folks. Let's do this again. It is intriguing to force ourselves to think of such animal house celebrations as modern carnival, or even as a latter day form of street theater, youthful mockery directed in part at the workday adult world, whose privileges and burdens present day young people are uncertain whether to envy or fear. And it is useful to force ourselves to think of those young people, at least the ones who attended high school or college, as modern equivalent to peasants and apprentices, the children and servants who once went abroad nights in late December. There is something more than a purely symbolic connection linking the two groups. Students, more than any other members of middle class society, live by a task oriented seasonal rhythm marked just toward the end of the calendar year by a period of intense labor, not bringing in the harvest, but studying for the final exams. And that, in turn, is followed just at Christmas by an extended period of strenuous release and aggressive leisure. But to recognize that connection with the past does not make the Animal House scenario more endearing. So it will not do to think there is an unstable line, whether historical or aesthetic, dividing invented traditions from real ones. I'll read it again. So it will not do to think there is an unstable line, whether historical or aesthetic, dividing invented traditions from real ones. But neither does this mean that we cannot and need not make judgments. If this book has argued, on the one hand, that traditions are constantly changing, and that the domestic Christmas ideally is surprisingly new, it has also argued that most of the problems we face at Christmas today, the greedy materialism, the jaded consumerism, the deliberate manipulation not only of goods, but also of private desires and personal relationships into purchasable commodities, are surprisingly old. They date, in fact, to the emergence of the domestic Christmas itself. And they were being publicly debated and lamented as early as the 1830s. This, too, is difficult to accept. It is natural to believe that the issues we face today are new ones, issues of unprecedented complexity, the likes of which have never been encountered. The problems we associate with Christmas in particular, the loss of authenticity, the decline of pure domestic felicity into an exhausting and often frustrating round of shopping for the perfect gifts, are the very problems we most easily associate with the facts of modern economic life. With advanced technologies of production and marketing, even people who fervently believe in market capitalism sometimes blame it for cheapening Christmas. But what this book has suggested is that there never was a time when Christmas existed as an unsullied domestic idyll, immune to the taint of commercialism, or idyll. I should say domestic idyll. It's Idyll. I'm not familiar with that word, actually. Idyll. I'll look it up later. It has argued that the domestic Christmas was the commercial Christmas, commercial from its earliest stages, commercial at its very core. Indeed, the domestic Christmas was itself a force in the spread of consumer capitalism. That may be the case because domesticity and capitalism themselves family values. The way he wrote this, let me go back. That may be the case because domesticity and capitalism themselves, family values, and accumulative, competitive ones, have been deeply interlinked from the very beginning, even when they have appeared to represent alternative modes of feeling or seem to be in conflict with each other. For there is that other kind of Christmas blues, the middle class blues, that bespeak our disappointment in the family itself for its failure to provide the yearn for intimacy that is its special role and trust at Christmas. But to fulfill that role, to satisfy that yearning, how much finally depends at both ends of the gift exchange on the selection of just the right presents. As purchasers, how often do we end by using money as a substitute for what we fear is insufficient thoughtfulness and sensitivity? By deciding at the end of a lengthy shopping excursion to buy expensive presents for our loved ones simply because we cannot think of that one simple gift that would be modest in price but perfectly intimate in effect. It is just this circumstance that may help to explain why in the second quarter of the 19th century, such rituals as Santa Claus and Christmas tree or stockings or gift wrapping took such rapid and profound hold on the imagination of those who created a new domestic Christmas. Perhaps the very speed and intensity with which those essentially new rituals were claimed as timeless tradition shows how powerful was the need to keep the relationship between family life and commercial economy hidden from view, to protect children and adults too from understanding something troublesome about the world they were making. In our own time, a century and a half later, that protection may be an indulgence we can no longer afford. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the book, The Battle for Christmas. Took me over an hour. I overestimated how fast I could go through that, but I finally finished it. Next Christmas, I might decide to just listen to the series myself, just to go through it once again. Thanks for watching. Now I get to go to some other readings, which I've been really, really wanting to get to. But this book is over 300 pages, and it just took a while to read all of it. God bless you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time here on the Steve Files.